the parent's pendulum can be swinging, but the child needs that stable, consistent, like, process of like moving against something that doesn't yield and that gives them the chance to form and grow. And it's very Taoist to me, actually, because I think a lot about the elements, and even just to sort of take it on a really macro level, like nature isn't gentle and kind, like nature is savage. And, you know, when I think you're talking about being around ledges and stuff, which made me think of that book, The Continuum Concept. And she speaks to that. She speaks about, you know, going to the Amazon and seeing children being allowed to play near pits or at the river's edge when they're 1 year old. And, you know, our babies, both of our babies were very much allowed to explore edges. And I still see people in the park kind of panicking or like running up to me when Leo's doing something, and I'm like, he's fine, he knows what he's doing. But, you know, people really get stressed out about that. And I think this is where it's like we take away the chance for them to develop the capacity to trust their own instincts and their own sort of sovereignty. And that's the piece I think that I'm interested in this boundary thing, because if a child is pushing against something, it gives them a chance to be creative. It's like, okay, well, how do I navigate this if I can't get what I want?
Can I ask you there, though?
Yeah.
You talked about your pendulum can be swinging as a parent, but it can't of the kids. But the thing, what happens is, you know, how often, the thing I like about, like, you know, I respect around your parenting is you will read these different books with different philosophies and engage with them to an extent.
Yeah, I never follow any of them fully.
Yeah, but that's, I feel like I'm so shocked when therefore you're talking about sovereignty, you do your best to integrate it into yourself and your own style of parenting, because regardless, if the mind isn't really strong and the parent's resilience around going, no matter what, I'm not going to dive into another dogma of just like following the rules of this book, no matter how desperate you get. I understand it and you need to for phases, for survival. If you are in a real survival phase, that's when it's like, okay, you just give me the rules and I'm going to follow it so I don't have to think for myself. I think that's fine, but that's leaking Jing because that's dogma. But the amount of times we've talked to, you know, people we've like parents who, and I've been there as well. So I do it with other areas, not parenting so much, but I've done it in many other areas. So I completely understand it, but it still takes me aback every time I hear someone going, or, you know, you've talked to another mother and they're like, I'm just using this philosophy now, and I think it's it, and that's it. I'm all on board, and I'm like, oh man, yeah, that's right. You know, I forgot that we're, you know, that is a pendulum swing, and that is going to impact the kid, because your foundations aren't so solid, and you're not like, I'm just going to like work with it for a little bit, integrate the parts that I think are necessary, and then keep on moving. Which I understand. That's where I guess like the most conscious part of parenting is. I think we've really been working on, which was, you know, been a bit difficult with, you know, the pandemic and then the floods and, you know, my mum moving up and having another kid, is realizing when your lifestyle isn't so appropriate to where you are at life, that you aren't walking on eggshells with your energy, so you're not leaking anything, and it's because you're within your what we call the spirit of the kidneys, your capacity, and you're not beyond your capacity, because you're going to get taken into new areas that are going to test you with kids and all these life things. But when you are on your edges, extremely on your edges, that's where you need a dogmatic philosophy, or vices.
Really. Yeah, well, that's where survival patterns kick in. And I mean, I think so I did this course for a year or 9 months with Leo after he was born, and it was with Jane Hardwick Collins, who's well known for doing work with women, and she and I had a chat about some of my stuff, and it was really funny because I was like, yeah, it's like I was like super enlightened, and then I met Mason, had kids, and it just all went back to like shit again. And she just laughed and she was like, yeah, you integrated it to that level, and now it's like spiral, you know, dynamics. I've got to go back around and integrate it in relationship and with children. And I see that, like, that's where I think I have a lot of compassion for people that, like, I'm quite lucky that I don't think my destructive habits are like so destructive, as in I don't, you know, I think having done a lot of stuff over the years, I've come to a place where my pendulum is pretty like, you live with me. Is that fair to say? Like it's
Yeah.
pretty narrow.
Yeah, way narrower than mine.
Yeah. Yes. But I think it's really important that like I honor that, but also that I honor my pendulum. So I want to be really clear. I'm going to backtrack to that statement. The child doesn't need to see your pendulum. You pendulum, but you pendulum with your friends and with your community and with your teachers and with whatever. But the kid gets consistency as much as you can provide it. And again, there's no perfection here. But that's I've like reading that and then reflecting on myself as a parent. That's when I've been most successful, is when my process is supported and held outside of my sort of family dynamic, really. And then the kids get the best of me, you know, because I'm able to really, I know that I'm sort of held out here and I'm able to deliver my best self as a parent. And that also for me came through reflecting on, yeah, it's nervous system stuff, like what you're speaking to. Like, yeah, people, I mean, if you were locked in an apartment for the last, 2 years, like if your kid's watching TV and eating Happy Meals, like no drama, like, you're doing your best. As in, I think like there's so much external stuff that it's hard to control. So that's where, and I'm lucky to have been trained in things like yoga and breathing and things. So I do catch myself. I've been thinking about this breathwork trend a lot lately because I'm seeing it everywhere. Breathwork, nervous system regulation, breathwork. And I'm really excited for people to be exposed to breath work because I think it's really important. And I'm also curious as to like, some of the ways it's being taught. I'm like, interesting. But I've noticed that that's something that I do. I have an internalized pattern of self-regulation that when I hit a certain point, I can sometimes, not always, flip over into a breath that brings me down, stops my nervous system from accelerating. So I think those kinds of things, that people can use as external tools are really helpful, especially when you're around little kids and they want to push your buttons. But yeah, I guess like I'm trying to say that one thing I think that helps with children, especially when because I think the thing with kids is their energy will match whatever's going on. So if I escalate, I will escalate and then it will escalate, whereas if I can regulate and kind of get on her level and be like, hey, cool, but like we're going to not do that.